In case you missed Zoom this morning, Wednesday, April 8th, this is what we covered. So we continued reading from the text from yesterday. A clash of cultures. The first successful English settlement in North America was established in 1607 in what's now Virginia. The settlement, called Jamestown, was built on Pamunkey Indian land. The Pamunkeys were part of a group called the Powhatans, led by a chief of the same name. The relationship between the natives and the settlers varied. The Pamunkeys sometimes shared their food with the colonists, who didn't know how to hunt or farm well, or traded with them, but tensions grew and fighting often broke out. While textbooks often make the Native Americans appear needlessly violent, there's evidence that the Pamunkeys tried to live in peace with the colonists. But the settlers were demanding and took the natives' attempts to listen to the colonists as signs of agreement with their ways. The English began to push the natives from their lands, and in 1622, the Powhatan Indians attacked Jamestown and other settlements, killing more than 300 of the 1,200 or so colonists. The Powhatans may have expected the English to leave or draw back afterward, but instead, the conflicts became worse. The problem with Pocahontas. Many people have heard the story of Pocahontas. This much is true. Pocahontas was the daughter of Powhatan. The story says that the Powhatan people captured Captain John Smith, a leader of the Jamestown colony, and Powhatan ordered him to be killed. However, the story goes, Pocahontas, often called an Indian princess, begged her father to spare Smith's life, and the natives released him. Many of the stories include a romance between Smith and Pocahontas. Historians now aren't sure that Pocahontas ever rescued Smith, and in fact, she might have barely known him. Smith never mentioned Pocahontas in his early writings. He started adding her to his story after she visited England and became popular there. When Smith led the colony, Pocahontas would have been very young, much younger than Smith. A tool for the English. Why do people like to believe the myth of Pocahontas? The colony's supporters backed the popular stories because they wanted to keep the colony profitable and needed people back in England to support it. The English also liked the idea that Pocahontas's supposed love or affection for Smith showed that the Native Americans admired English culture and wanted to be like them. It may have made them feel better about their own history. Pocahontas married a colonist named John Rolfe and visited England. She died at age 21 before she could return to North America. The Pilgrims arrive. There are probably more myths about the Pilgrims, who established the first permanent colony in the New England region, than there are about any other colonists. The story is told that the Pilgrims fled England because they wanted to be free to worship the way they wanted. In reality, only about a third of the Pilgrims who landed in 1620 were Puritans who wanted to practice their own religion. And these Puritans had a good deal of religious freedom in Holland, where they settled in 1609 after first leaving England. The reason they later came to the New World was very similar to the reason colonists settled Jamestown. They wanted to make money. They had no interest in religious freedom for anyone else and banned other religions in their colony. Fact finder. Pilgrims are usually pictured wearing black and looking solemn and ready to lecture anyone for having fun. But Edward Winslow, a colony leader, described a harvest festival in 1621 with sports, shooting, and beer. The stories say that the Pilgrims' ship, the Mayflower, landed on Plymouth Rock. However, the Pilgrims never mention Plymouth Rock in their writings, and every good sailor knows to avoid a rocky coastline. Rights and force. While much of the classic Thanksgiving story is doubtful, the Pilgrims did sign a peace treaty with the Wampanoag Indians in 1621. The Indians taught the colonists how to plant, hunt, and survive, but the Pilgrims didn't trust the Indians, believing that they were savages and devil worshippers. The peace didn't last long. More Puritans arrived in 1630 to set up the Massachusetts Bay Colony, taking over more native lands. The colony's leader, John Winthrop, said that the natives had a natural right to the land, but not a civil right under English law because they hadn't developed it. The colonists also used Bible passages to justify taking the land by force. Over time, they created cities, including Boston and Charlestown, on this land. John Carver was the first governor of the Pilgrim settlement in Plymouth. He established a peace treaty between the Wampanoag chief Massasoit and King James of England. Salem witch trials. Everyone knows the story of the Salem witch trials, right? Some of what you think is true might not be. In 1692, starting in Salem Village, today's Danvers, Massachusetts, in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, 2 girls began acting oddly, screaming and having fits. The local doctor, unable to find an answer, blamed witchcraft. The girls accused 3 women of bewitching them, and then the charges spread. Soon dozens of people, mostly women, were accused of witchcraft, not just in Salem, but throughout the colony. Not all of these so-called witches were executed. A special court found about 200 people guilty, and 19 people, 4 of them men, were killed. This was nothing new, however. Thousands of people were executed for witchcraft throughout Europe from the 1300s to the 1600s. Fact finder. People tend to believe that the witches found guilty during the trials were burned at the stake. However, most hanged. One, an elderly man, was pressed to death by stones. This picture shows the 1692 trial of George Jacobs, who was one of the relatively few men accused of witchcraft in Salem. Jacobs was later one of the 4 men executed. This land was our land. While the settlers often considered the Native Americans savages, the reality is that the Puritans and other invaders were often quite savage toward the original inhabitants of the continent. In the 1630s, colonists began settling in what's now Connecticut. At first, those colonists coexisted with the neighboring Pequot Indians, but they also wanted the Pequot's land. In 1636, after some Pequots killed a troublesome colonist, the English declared an all-out war. The Pequot War lasted about a year. The colonists avoided fighting Indian warriors, preferring to burn down their villages in the middle of the night and slaughter the women and children. The colonists also convinced other Indian tribes to join them against the Pequots and then turned against those tribes. Hundreds of the Pequot people were killed in the war. There were massacres and many deaths on both sides of the many conflicts between colonists and Native Americans. However, the colonists were the invaders on this continent, something history books often leave out.